So we've got the brand new Apple TV 4K over here.
The Apple Pippen. It's a revolutionary new game console coming up. We first saw it at CES 1996.
So, you think Steve Jobs nailed everything he touched, huh? Well, he didn't. Yeah, the guy gave us the iPhone, but he started many projects that never made it out alive.
This is a phone that we have worked on with Motorola that has an iTunes client in it where you can play iTunes music that you've gotten from your CD library or bought from the online store right on your phone.
Stick around and I'll tell you all about the secret projects Steve Jobs never finished and why they are still talked about today. Number 1. Project Titan. Knowing Steve Jobs' background, growing up around cars and later leading Apple to dominate tech in the early 2000s, the idea of an Apple car naturally floated into his mind. Jobs envisioned Apple in every aspect of life, including transit. During the 2008 to 2010 automotive industry crisis, Tony Fadell, Apple's senior VP, suggested Jobs buy General Motors while their stock was cheap. Jobs considered it, but dropped the idea, fearing it wouldn't align with Apple's image. Still, the two discussed the concept of an electric, autonomous Apple car. Jobs never pursued the project, focusing instead on the iPhone as his health declined. In 2014, Tim Cook revived the vision with Project Titan, aiming to revolutionize the car industry. However, Titan faced a decade of delays, costing Apple over $10 billion. Without Jobs' direction, plans faltered. Partnerships with Tesla and Volkswagen failed, and in February 2024, Apple officially ended Project Titan, a costly lesson in the need for clear vision. Number 2. Apple's digital TV. You are probably familiar with the Apple TV box, a digital media player, and micro console from Apple. But this wasn't Apple's first attempt at a TV-based device. They had tried several times before without much success. While the Apple TV box was a big hit, it wasn't the end of the road for Steve Jobs. According to Walter Isaacson's biography, Jobs was working toward a revolutionary digital TV that would transform how people consumed media and music. His focus? A sleek interface with Apple's signature simplicity.
Apple devices and services, so you can easily change the audio output from your TV to your AirPods, for example, if you want to discreetly watch some TV without disturbing other people in your home.
Jobs envisioned a TV set seamlessly connecting to all your devices and iCloud, eliminating clunky remotes and outdated tech. While the Apple TV box partially fulfilled this vision, Jobs said he'd cracked how to create a fully integrated digital TV. If Jobs had more time, maybe the Apple TV wouldn't just be a box, but a revolutionary TV set. In today's era of smart TVs, his vision feels ahead of its time. Number 3. Apple Lisa. Apple wasn't the first to create computers, but they're credited with making the first mass-market personal computer. Enter the Apple Lisa, a project close to Steve Jobs' heart.
A few things here. This is an original Lisa with the Twiggy drives, which were a high-density format that Apple...
Officially, Lisa stood for Local Integrated Software Architecture, but it was also named after Steve's first daughter. The idea came after Jobs visited Xerox PARC, where he saw the graphical user interface, GUI, with windows, icons, menus, and a pointer. Before this, computers relied on command line interfaces, which weren't user-friendly. Jobs knew this was the future and aimed to create the first desktop computer with a GUI. Lisa introduced features we now take for granted, a user-friendly GUI and the first ever use of a mouse in a personal computer. However, Lisa flopped. It was technologically advanced but ridiculously expensive, costing around $10,000, $30,000 in today's money. Apple also targeted corporations instead of the general public, straying from their original vision. To be fair, the failure wasn't entirely on Jobs. Midway through the project, he was removed from the Lisa team due to disagreements and internal politics. Jobs didn't settle down though. He shifted his attention and started leading the Macintosh project, which replaced Lisa 2 years after it came out and ended up being more successful. So while Lisa was not successful in the market, it laid the foundation for Macintosh and altered the history of personal computing forever. Number 4. The Cube. In July 2000, Steve Jobs unveiled the PowerMac G4 Cube, a sleek 20-centimeter cube that stunned everyone with its floating design and lack of mechanical button. Jobs envisioned the cube as a middle ground between the iMac and PowerMac G4, combining aesthetics with innovation. It was more like a piece of art than a computer, something you'd proudly display in your living room. However, the cube didn't fit into Apple's product strategy and faced major issues. It was priced higher than other Apple computers, and the cost cost didn't include a display or accessory. Additionally, its air cooling system was flawed, and the acrylic glass design was expensive to manufacture. With poor sales of only 15,000 units, Apple discontinued the Cube within a year. Despite its failure, it became a wonderful failure, teaching Apple lessons about pricing and practicality before they struck gold with the iPod. Number 5, Apple's digital content. Sure, iTunes turned things around for Apple, but getting there wasn't smooth. Steve Jobs had to experiment multiple times before finding success. In the late 1990s, as the internet grew, Jobs realized media could be distributed online legally. Seeing its market potential, he began creating a platform for downloading music and media. He faced major roadblocks between 1999 and 2000, especially in negotiating with music labels and studios. Without their agreements, the project stalled and never launched. However, this early attempt wasn't wasted. It laid the groundwork for iTunes, which debuted in 2003, and gave Jobs a clear understanding of what Apple needed to succeed in the digital media world. As history shows, they nailed it, revolutionizing how people accessed music and media. Number 6, Apple TV. We have talked about how the digital Apple TV was one of Steve Jobs' unfinished projects, with the Apple TV box being the first step toward that vision. Before departing from the world, Steve called it a hobby project and made sure to roll out some significant upgrades while dropping the price for newer generations. But let's be real, the initial launch was kind of a commercial flop. Looking back, Apple TV's history feels like a series of missed opportunities, which isn't something you'd usually associate with Steve Jobs. Apple entered the streaming device game way before it was a thing, but they just didn't prioritize it. Even as streaming services started blowing up, Apple didn't capitalize on the trend. It wasn't until 2015 that they finally brought iOS to the product, allowing users to install apps and browse the internet. One of the biggest people's complaints about the previous versions was the fact that they were very iTunes dependent. You could purchase the device, but without a Mac or PC running iTunes on the same network, it was pretty much useless. Meanwhile, game consoles and other streaming devices were taking off because they didn't have those limitations. Steve took the feedback from its underwhelming performance to heart, making significant improvements in later generations, which helped Apple TV gain some traction. However, even with those upgrades, it never reached the iconic status of products like the iPod or iPhone. Number 7, iPod HiFi. Back in 2006, Apple announced the iPod HiFi, way before smart homes or even smartphones were a thing.
This is iPod HiFi. Take the grill off. It's a 3-driver system. This is what it looks like from the top a little bit.
They said a home stereo system is a fancy way of describing a speaker with a dock for the iPod and a remote controller. Basically, the idea was to dock your iPod, play music, and be able to charge it at the same time. After the launch, people were excited about the iPod HiFi, but when it was out in the market, it didn't sell up to the hype, and in just 18 months, it was stopped by Apple. So, what went wrong? Well, for starters, sales didn't meet expectations. Sure, the iPod HiFi sounded great and worked perfectly in homes, but it came with a $349 price tag, only $50 less than the most advanced iPod at the time. That kind of price didn't sit well with the average consumer. People who wanted booming speakers for their homes were finding cheaper options that offered more flexibility. Those competing speakers could connect to pretty much any audio source. Unlike the iPod HiFi, which only worked with iPod. It didn't even have basic features like AM/FM radio. For a company known for innovation, the iPod HiFi felt underwhelming. Apple didn't push any boundaries in audio tech or offer something groundbreaking. They tried to lower the price to get more people to buy it, but it didn't really work. Finally, Steve Jobs decided to just stop making. Fast forward more than a decade later, and Apple jumped back into the speaker game with the HomePod. This time, led by Tim Cook and learning from their past mistakes, they were all about making it a success. While the HomePod sounded amazing, it ran into the same issue: price. So, after a few years, the original HomePod was discontinued. Number 8, the Apple Pippen. In the mid-90s, Apple tried to make a gaming console called the Pippen. It wasn't just for gaming, it was also a computer and media player. Apple wanted to mix entertainment and tech, but things didn't go as planned. The Pippen launched in 1996 for $600.
Pippen technology is technology derived from the Power Mac architecture.
That was expensive compared to consoles like the PlayStation, which were cheaper and better for gaming. The Pippen didn't have many games either, so people weren't interested. Apple worked with Bondi to make it, but they sold fewer than 50,000 units before shutting it down in 1997. It was a big flop, but it showed Apple's early ideas about mixing computers with entertainment. While the Pippen failed, it was a step toward the tech we see today in Apple's products like the iPhone and iPad. Number 9. PowerMac G4 Cube. The PowerMac G4 Cube, launched in 2000, was one of Steve Jobs' boldest creations. It wasn't just a computer, it was a piece of art. Encased in a clear acrylic box with no fans and a minimalist design, the Cube looked futuristic and elegant. Jobs believed it was the perfect blend of technology and style. But here's the thing, it didn't work out. The Cube was priced at $1,799, and that didn't even include a monitor. Most people couldn't justify spending that much when they could get a better performing Mac for less. On top of that, its fanless design caused it to overheat, and the acrylic case, it cracked easily, frustrating buyers even more. Consumers wanted practicality, not just beauty. The Cube sold fewer than 150,000 units before Apple discontinued it less than a year later. Even though the G4 Cube was a commercial failure, it still stands as a design icon. It was one of those projects where Steve Jobs' vision of combining art and technology didn't fully connect with what people needed at the time. Number 10. The Xerox Alto-inspired Apple IIX. In the late 1970s, Steve Jobs visited Xerox's Palo Alto Research Center and saw the Xerox Alto, a revolutionary computer with a graphical user interface GUI, a mouse, and features that felt like they were from the future. Jobs instantly realized this was the direction computing should take. But instead of fully committing to this vision, Apple tried to blend these ideas into their existing lineup, including the Apple II series. The Apple IIX was meant to be an advanced version of the Apple II, taking inspiration from the Xerox Alto. However, it didn't live up to its potential. The iX lacked the true GUI and mouse functionality that made the Xerox Alto so innovative. Instead, it was just a more powerful version of the Apple II with incremental improvement. Apple focused most of its energy on the Macintosh, leaving the iX to feel like an afterthought. Consumers didn't embrace the iX because it didn't offer anything groundbreaking. It was overshadowed by the Macintosh, which fully adopted the GUI concept. The iX was eventually discontinued, and while it wasn't a complete failure, it didn't deliver on Jobs' vision of transforming computing. Number 11. Macintosh XL. The Macintosh XL, launched in 1985, was Apple's attempt to revive the failing Lisa computer by rebranding it as part of the Macintosh lineup. The Lisa had been Steve Jobs' passion project, heavily inspired by his visit to Xerox PARC, where he saw the groundbreaking Xerox Alto. However, while Xerox focused on research, Jobs wanted to make it consumer-friendly. The Lisa, and later, the Macintosh XL, brought these concepts to the market, but failed for one big reason: price. It was far too expensive for the average user at nearly $10,000. It also didn't help that the Macintosh XL ran slower than expected, and its bulky design felt dated compared to newer Mac. Apple discontinued the Macintosh XL less than a year after its release. While the project failed commercially, it paved the way for Apple's success with the Macintosh line, which refined the GUI and made it more accessible. The Macintosh XL was a reminder that being inspired by Xerox was just the beginning, and execution and affordability were key. Number 12. Apple III. The Apple III, launched in 1980, was supposed to be Apple's next big thing. Steve Jobs wanted it to replace the hugely successful Apple II and cement Apple's dominance in the business world. But instead, it became Apple's first major flop. The biggest issue? The design. Jobs insisted on a fanless computer to keep it sleek and quiet, but this led to overheating problems. Chips would literally melt off the motherboard, causing constant crashes. To fix it, users were told to lift the computer and drop it back down to reseat the chips, an embarrassing solution for such an expensive product. Speaking of expensive, the Apple III costs over $4,000, which is way too much for most businesses. It also didn't have enough new features to justify upgrading from the Apple II, which was still selling like hotcakes. Apple eventually recalled thousands of units and tried to fix the issues, but by then the damage was done. The Apple III sold fewer than 65,000 units before being discontinued in 1984. This failure taught Steve Jobs a crucial lesson. Great design needs to be practical, not just pretty. It was a costly but important mistake. Number 13. iTunes Ping. In 2010, Steve Jobs introduced iTunes Ping, a music-focused social network built into iTunes. Jobs envisioned it as a platform where users could connect with friends, follow their favorite artists, and discover new music. It seemed like a brilliant idea to combine the massive popularity of iTunes with the growing social media trend. But Ping never took off. For starters, it felt clunky and half-baked. Users couldn't easily share posts on platforms like Facebook or Twitter, which were already dominating social media. The design was confusing, and the features felt limited. Instead of feeling like a social network, Ping came across as a glorified playlist sharing tool. Another issue was spam. Ping was flooded with fake accounts and sketchy comments almost immediately, making it an unwelcoming experience. Artists barely engaged with it, and users quickly lost interest. By 2012, Apple shut down Ping, admitting defeat. It was one of the rare flops during Jobs' second tenure at Apple. While the idea of mixing music and social networking was ahead of its time, Ping lacked the polish and user-friendliness Apple was known for. It remains a reminder that even Jobs wasn't immune to misstep. Number 14, fired from Apple. In 1985, Steve Jobs faced a shocking turn of events. He was ousted from Apple, the company he co-founded. Jobs had clashed with then CEO John Sculley, whom he had personally recruited to lead the company. The disagreement centered around the direction of Apple, with Jobs' visionary but risky ideas at odds with Sculley's more cautious approach. The conflict came to a head when Jobs attempted to take control of the company's operation. Sculley, backed by Apple's board, stripped Jobs of his responsibility, leaving him sidelined. Frustrated and powerless, Jobs eventually resigned.
Tell us about your departure from Apple.
Oh, it was very painful. I'm not even sure I want to talk about it. What can I say? I hired the wrong guy.
It was a humbling experience for Jobs, but he called it the best thing that ever happened to him. Number 15, the hockey puck mouse. In 1998, Apple launched the iMac G3, a colorful computer that was a big success. With it came the hockey puck mouse, a small round mouse that matched the iMac's playful design. Steve Jobs loved its unique look and thought it fit Apple's creative style. But while it looked cool, the mouse was terrible to use. Its round shape made it hard to tell which way was up, so people often moved the cursor in the wrong direction. It was also small and uncomfortable, making long use frustrating. Customers and critics didn't like it. They complained that it focused too much on design and ignored usability.
Puck mouse, and of course I talked about how the problem with the puck mouse that everyone had was that it's round, and they found it difficult to use for that reason.
By 2000, Apple replaced it with a better designed mouse. The hockey puck mouse is now remembered as one of Apple's rare design mistakes. Number 16, iPod socks. In 2004, Steve Jobs introduced iPod socks, a colorful and fun way to protect iPods. Each pack came with 6 brightly colored knitted sleeves, and Jobs presented them with his usual enthusiasm, calling them a great gift idea.
This was generally the most obscure iPod accessory that Apple ever made, and it's really forgotten in these days.
They were designed to match Apple's style and add some personality to the iPod line, but the iPod socks didn't do much beyond looking cute. They couldn't protect against drops or water, and for $29, many people felt they were overpriced for something so simple. Customers quickly realized there were better, more useful cases available. While they sold for a few years, iPod socks were never a big hit. Apple quietly discontinued them, and they became more of a fun gimmick than a serious accessory. This was one of Steve Jobs' rare misses. While he had a knack for creating innovative, game-changing product, iPod socks didn't meet a real need. Number 17, the Flower Power iMac. Steve Jobs introduced a special version of the iMac G3 called the Flower Power iMac. It was part of a lineup designed to stand out with colorful, playful patterns. Jobs believed these bold designs would make the iMac even more appealing to young people and creative users. But things didn't go as planned. The Flower Power iMac had a bright floral pattern that many people thought was over the top and childish. Instead of looking stylish, it came across as tacky to most buyers. The other option in this lineup, the Blue Dalmatian iMac, faced the same criticism. While the iMac G3 itself was a successful computer, these special editions didn't sell well. Most customers preferred the solid colors Apple had used before, which felt more modern and timely. The Flower Power iMac was quickly discontinued, and Apple moved away from such flashy design. Number 18, ROKR. In 2005, Apple partnered with Motorola to create the ROKR E1, the first phone with iTunes. It was supposed to combine music and mobile functionality.
This is a phone that we have worked on with Motorola that has an iTunes client in it where you can play iTunes music that you've gotten from your CD library or bought from the online store right on your phone,
giving users the ability to carry their favorite songs on their phone. The result, however, was disappointing. The ROKR E1 was limited to just 100 songs, regardless of storage space, and transferring music was painfully slow. Its outdated design and clunky user experience didn't help either, leaving customers unimpressed. Critics called it an underwhelming product, especially for something associated with Apple. Steve Jobs wasn't happy with the outcome. The ROKR showed Apple that relying on another company's hardware wouldn't work. By 2007, Apple took matters into its own hands, releasing the iPhone, a product that redefined the entire industry. The ROKR is now seen as a failed first attempt that motivated Apple to aim higher and create a truly innovative mobile device. Number 19, MobileMe. MobileMe was Apple's idea of a cloud service that could sync your email, contacts, and calendars across all your devices. It sounded great, but when it launched, it was a mess. People complained that MobileMe didn't work properly. Emails went missing, calendars wouldn't sync, and Apple's servers kept crashing. Instead of making life easier, it just frustrated everyone. Steve Jobs wasn't happy about it either. He famously called the team into a meeting and asked, "What is MobileMe supposed to do?" When they answered, he told them, "Then why doesn't it do that?" He was furious about how badly it damaged Apple's reputation. Apple tried to fix MobileMe, but the problems were too big. By 2011, they shut it down and replaced it with iCloud, which finally worked the way it should. MobileMe is remembered as one of Steve Jobs' biggest missteps. It taught Apple a hard lesson. Even great ideas need solid execution to succeed. Let this be a reminder that Apple didn't always get it right. Number 20, Next Computer. Next Computers isn't a secret now, and it never really was. Steve Jobs founded the company in 1985 after being pushed out of Apple. But Next Step, that's a name you don't hear often, even though it laid the groundwork for macOS. Next Inkrance focused on creating computer workstations for higher education and business markets, inspired by a conversation Jobs had with scientist Paul Berg. Berg suggested Apple should create workstations tailored for higher education. After leaving Apple, Jobs took that idea and ran with it. The work Next was doing was so innovative that most people couldn't grasp it, making it seem secretive. Next Computers were based on object-oriented programming and a Unix foundation, making them solid and reliable. Though Next didn't compete with IBM or Apple in sales, its technology was groundbreaking. The first web server was built on a Next station, and when Apple bought Next in 1997, its software became the foundation for Mac OS X, marking Apple's revival and success. Number 21, Project Purple. In 2004, Steve Jobs envisioned a device combining a phone, music player, and internet access. At the time, iPods were thriving, but Jobs realized people still needed to carry phone. He suspected someone would merge the two, so why not Apple? He put Tony Fadell on hardware, Scott Forstall on software, and Jonathan Ive on design. Under the codename Project Purple, they worked in strict secrecy, with airtight confidentiality agreements and secure facility. At the Macworld Expo, Jobs unveiled the first iPhone on January 2007, shocking the industry.
Let me talk about a category of things. The most advanced phones are called smartphones.
Apple, known for computers and iPods, had entered uncharted territory and revolutionized the smartphone world. While Jobs saw the iPhone's success, he passed away before seeing the iPhone 5 and 6 completed. However, his vision laid the foundation for future innovation. Number 22, Apple Park. In April 2006, Steve Jobs announced plans for a new Apple campus, a vision he was deeply passionate about. Although he didn't live to see it completed, it remains one of the most iconic pieces of architecture. Initially planned for 2010, setbacks delayed the project. Months before his death, Jobs personally presented the design to the Cupertino City Council. He envisioned a campus blending nature and technology, more like a park than an office, believing it would fuel creativity. The council approved construction in 2011, and Apple Park was completed by 2017, just as Jobs had imagined. Inspired by a spaceship, the circular design was meticulously crafted to honor his legacy.
The massive ring-shaped building is now an iconic symbol of the Apple brand.
Apple spent over $5 billion creating the campus, spanning 175 acres and housing more than 12,000 employees. Apple Park stands as a testament to Jobs' vision of design, sustainability, and innovation. Number 23, Apple Glasses. In early 2024, Apple Vision took the internet by storm. Memes flooded social media, mocking people for wearing the glasses on the street. But just as quickly as the hype began, it fizzled out. Apple Vision wasn't a Steve Jobs invention, which might explain its flop. While there's no evidence Jobs worked on augmented reality, experts speculate he may have toyed with the idea of wearable tech. Tim Cook, who admired Jobs, often praised AR and likely hoped Apple Vision would be his defining product, like the iPhone or iPad. Despite being a technological marvel with impressive display tech, the Vision Pro failed to connect with most people. Its high price made it feel like a luxury, and buyers returned it, citing health issues and its bulky design. Concerns about the cognitive effects of prolonged use didn't help. Apple claimed it could replace computers, but for now, Vision Pro feels more like a misstep than a revolution. And with that, our journey through Steve Jobs' visionary projects comes to an end. We've covered a lot, but there are probably other ideas he had that remain hidden in the shadow. So, what do you think was Steve Jobs' biggest game changer? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and hit the little bell to get notified whenever we post more content just for you. Thanks for watching, and see you